Okay. As a reminder, I know it's a little bit early, but it's being recorded, so anybody who misses the announcements can watch the beginning of the video. But just because I called your name online and recognize the fact that you're here doesn't mean you still have to send in the attendance keywords. Because as I'm looking at my attendance sheet, I can see some people who are here right now online. They were also here online yesterday or on Monday, but never sent in the keywords. So make sure you send the email with the keywords. Even if I said, like, hey, good morning, Raven, or good morning, David, or good morning, Aaron, whatever. Make sure you send the emails. What else? I guess that's it for attendance. Morning. Let's see. Yeah, and that was it for attendance. So make sure you send in the emails. Make sure you send them before 9 a.m. Really, to be honest, in case you ever wondered why, it's to make it a little bit harder to cheat. It's still, people could still cheat, but at least if you have to get it done by 9 a.m., you have to cheat quickly. Like whoever was here and got the words has to quickly contact the person who wasn't here and didn't get the words. Then they have to quickly contact me and give me those words. It's a hassle, and I do that on purpose. So anyway, that's it for attendance. Any questions about attendance? All right, let me think what other reminders or announcements. Lab. If you do not come to lab on Monday, you should come today. Because if you don't, obviously, if you miss lab, you're only going to get quarter credit for what you do. And this lab is a team effort, so you need to be there. Next week's lab, well, technically next week is spring break, so not next week, but the next lab is going to be completely online. So as long as you have it done before we have lab, then you don't need to meet online. Otherwise, you do need to meet online. So again, we have spring break next week, so we got 2 weeks to get it done, and I'm always here to help. What else? Oh yeah, one last announcement. So you guys are in the in-person class, but online courses are 8 weeks apiece. So I just finished one of my semesters for my environmental biology course, and it reminded me to remind you about extra credit and things like that. So like I keep saying, if you guys meet me for any assignment or exam and let me give you feedback, you can get a 5% boost to that grade, right? So if you had a 90, that's what? 4.5 points, 4.5 extra points just for sitting through me, going through and telling you, talking to you about the questions you got wrong. 5% boost. The reason I'm bringing that up in context of the semester that just ended, a lot of you are going to think all of a sudden at the end that you care about your grade. And to be honest with you, that's not the time to do it. So that offer that I'm giving you extends up until the last week of class. So I'm not going to spend my whole week meeting with people who all of a sudden care about the grade. So now's the time to get that feedback. Now's the time to do your independent work, which is now extra credit, because, and I know it's going to happen. Mark my words. Some of you right now listening don't care about your grade right now, but you will at the last week, and you're going to be sending emails and telling me about your scholarships and things like that. And I'm telling you right now, now's the time to fix your grade. Anyway, any questions before we jump back into chapter 8 and then start chapter 9?
So if we want to meet with you, do we just email you? And
yes.
Okay.
You can just drop in during office hours online.
Okay.
Or in person too. Or if it's outside of office hours, then email me and we'll schedule a time. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Great question. Anybody else?
Just so y'all know, he does try to meet with you very briefly, quickly.
Yeah. Usually it is very quickly. Yeah. The advance yours are usually you've got a pretty good understanding of what's going on. So my meetings with you are pretty quick. Some people, and I'm not saying this to be mean, but some people might be a little bit more lost than others, in which case the meetings might be a little bit longer.
I was just meaning what you say, like you will get on top of it and be there to help.
Right. Thank you, Vance. All right, then. If there's no other questions, let's jump into it. To remind you where we left off, we were talking about Down syndrome. I'm not going to ask you any questions about Down syndrome. And let me back it up even one more step. The reason we're talking about Down syndrome is because we're talking about this bullet point right here, which is what happens when things go wrong, right? meiosis is not a perfect process. Neither is mitosis, and we'll talk about that a little bit later in later chapters. But yeah, it's not perfect. So when things go wrong, we call that non-disjunction. And remember, non-disjunction is just when the chromosomes don't separate. Whether we're talking about the homologous chromosomes in meiosis 1 or the sister chromatids in meiosis 2. Either way, when they don't separate, that gives you problems. Sometimes you have too many chromosomes. Sometimes you don't have enough. And again, the one example your book gives is Down syndrome. So that's why I even included it, because your book did. The reason your book talked about it out of all the different chromosome numbers is because it's the most common. So there's a bunch of them. You can look them up if you want for independent work. What happens if you have extra of other chromosomes? What happens if you don't have enough of the other chromosomes? You can take a look and find out for yourself. I'm not even going to read what's on this slide because, again, I'm not going to test you on it. Here's a hypothesis I have, and I keep saying this every semester, and I've never looked into it. Or maybe I have and I forgot. That's possible too. Anyway, here's a karyotype, right? These are normal. This is a normal karyotype. This is a normal human being that has the normal number of chromosomes all the way up from chromosome number 1 to the 23rd set of chromosomes, which are the sex chromosomes. That's what a normal set looks like. Here's what a karyotype looks like for somebody with Down syndrome, which again is called trisomy 21. The reason it's called trisomy 21 is because there's 3 of the number 21 chromosome. So anyway, back to my hypothesis that I haven't looked up. It's probably really easy to find. I'm thinking the reason this is so common, right? There's relatively a lot of people with Down syndrome as opposed to, you don't hear about other things like, oh yeah, they have an extra chromosome number 2, right? You don't hear about that a lot. My hypothesis is because look how tiny that little chromosome is, right? And then compare that to chromosome number 1. These are all to scale. So this chromosome 21 is that big compared to chromosome number 1. So my hypothesis is those tiny little chromosomes probably carry much less information. Actually, I would almost guarantee it, right? Because that's all it is. Chromosomes are nothing but long strands of DNA. So the bigger it is, the more DNA there is. And the more DNA it is, that you would think that there's more genes. Therefore, chromosome number 1, for example, probably has a lot more genes than chromosome number 21. So I'm thinking if you have a little mix-up with a smaller chromosome, that's probably less serious than when you have some huge chromosome like chromosome number 1. I don't know that. It's just a hypothesis. You can look it up for independent work if you want. And like I said, what about all these other ones? We know trisomy 21 is Down syndrome. Well, what happens if you have an extra chromosome number 14? Or if you're missing a chromosome number 6? So whatever number you might want to come up with. Anyway, again, I'm not going to test on this. But are there any questions about it? All right, here's where it gets a little bit more interesting, in my opinion, and we're going to go through a quick.
Words today.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, we'll go ahead and start. Attendance words. The first attendance word will be speaker box. And I think I've used speaker before, but now I'm saying speaker box. This is 2 words, but whatever. The first phrase for attendance today will be speaker box. Thank you, Vance. So anyway, now we're talking about chromosome number abnormalities, but we're talking about specifically sex chromosomes, which to me, again, I don't know why I find this so interesting, but I do. To remind you, for mammals, males are X and Y, right? So if you look at any normal human male, and by normal, I mean they have the normal chromosomes, they would have an X and a Y chromosome. A female would have an X and an X chromosome. But again, sometimes meiosis goes wrong and you have non-disjunction. So sometimes you got to have extra chromosomes, extra X chromosomes, extra Y chromosomes. Sometimes you could be missing a chromosome. So that's what we're about to talk about. Here's a picture of it. This is, let me see, XX, XY. So we have an extra chromosome, an extra Y chromosome right there. Anyway, I'm going to just skip ahead. Even if you're taking notes, again, I apologize, but this will not be on the exam. I'm not going to cover sex chromosomes on the exam. It's interesting, but it's not very important for the grand scheme of the semester. You can not understand this, but still understand the things that are coming. Here's a whole chart from your tape. I think this is from your book. If it's not, that's okay anyway. So this tells you the different types of sex chromosome abnormalities. For example, this top one here is having an extra X chromosome. This one's having an extra Y chromosome. This one is, excuse me, yeah. Let me back that up. This at the top is a male who has an extra X chromosome. And remember, the X chromosome, you could almost consider that the female chromosome. This one is the female who has an extra X chromosome. This is the female who only has one X chromosome. And then, of course, they all have names. So if you're studying, you don't need to know those names. They tell you how it happens. Again, it's all non-disjunction, but it tells you specifically how it happens, right? Is it in the egg? Is it in the sperm? It gives you that. It also tells you how relatively or how frequent it is in the population. So, for example, that one up top, Klinefelter syndrome. That's a male that has the extra X chromosome. That is 1 in every 2,000 people have that. And then down here, it gives you the symptoms. So that person would be sterile with underdeveloped testes and secondary female characteristics, which makes sense. So it's still a male, but they have that extra X chromosome, and the X chromosome is a female chromosome. So it would just kind of make sense that there'd be a little bit of a female side to them. Here's an interesting one. And I keep saying this, but I read it years ago, and I should read it again to make sure this is still current and I was correct and I'm not misremembering it. But this one right here, XYY. 1 in 2,000 people in the normal population have XYY. And I read somewhere a long time ago, so I don't know if this is still correct or if I'm still remembering this correctly. Well, actually, how many of you are criminal justice majors? Any of you guys in here? Anybody online? Maybe not. Okay. This would be more relevant to criminal justice majors. But XYY, that is a male that has the extra male chromosome, the Y chromosome. And from what I read, those people who are slightly taller than average, that's not me, by the way. I have normal chromosomes, in case you're wondering. Some people call them super males, not because they're super, but because they have that extra Y chromosome. They have extra testosterone, but they also have the things that go along with extra testosterone, like a lot of extra aggression. And I think, if I remember correctly, well, we know for a fact that the normal population, that's only 1 in 2,000 people who have that. But in a prison population, I read somewhere that it's a higher percentage, because apparently that extra Y chromosome that's making people more aggressive makes them more likely to do more aggressive illegal things, like beat somebody or, kidnap somebody or rape somebody, things like that. Not to say, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying if this is you that you are a rapist or a murderer or something. I'm just saying I remember reading in the prison population, the percentage is a little bit higher. Anyway, any questions about that? Okay. And again, I mentioned this in this last discussion, but if you want to look up sex chromosome stuff and how sex works in other animals other than humans, it's really fascinating. Some things, like I said on Monday, they'll just completely switch sexes. Like, it's convenient to be a female, but now all of a sudden we need a male. So they will literally switch sexes. Anyway, here we are to the end of the chapter where we come to the evolution connection, which we have at the end of every chapter. And always, I'm going to skip over it. I will at least mention this because there's a question on the study guide, and it is worth mentioning. They're talking about the evolutionary advantage of asexual reproduction and sexual reproduction. So asexual reproduction, remember, it's basically making a carbon copy of yourself. Basically. Now, one of you did a great paper on parthenogenesis and broke it down to 2 different types of parthenogenesis, one of which is not a carbon copy. But I won't even get into that conversation. Generally speaking, asexual reproduction, you're making a perfect copy, right? So when would that be advantageous? Well, that would be advantageous when you are a perfect fit for your environment, right? You are very well adapted to your environment. The temperature of the water, the temperature of the air, the humidity. And then by you, I don't mean humans. I'm talking about other organisms, because humans are pretty good at taking care of those things. Anyway, so asexual reproduction will be great in those situations, right? You don't need to change. You're perfect. You're perfectly adapted to your environment, and your environment's not changing, right? Because if you have a rapidly changing environment, then it doesn't matter that you are perfectly adapted to your environment, because things might be very different in 1 or 2 generations. Also, another advantage to asexual reproduction would be if you just can't have sex, right? If it's hard for you to find a mate, then obviously asexual reproduction would be advantageous. That's it. That's all I have to say about this side. And I know I can see people taking notes, and I apologize, but we are behind. And again, this won't be on the exam. So I'm skipping this slide and moving to the next. Sexual reproduction, the advantages to that are basically the opposite of the advantages to asexual reproduction. So instead of being in a non-changing environment that you are very well adapted to, sexual reproduction would be good for if there is a rapidly changing environment, right? If things are constantly changing, or if maybe you're not perfectly adapted to your environment. Because what sexual reproduction gives you, and this is what you should know from the earlier parts of the chapter, sexual reproduction gives you.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Football practice still. I'm still coming to class.
Okay.
Just
Thanks.
letting you know.
Okay. So with the sexual reproduction, the advantage, again, like I was saying earlier, you have diversity, right? So each one of your offspring is not perfectly, they're not exactly like you, and they're not exactly like each other, which is great because when things are changing in the environment, like if the climate gets colder or if you're a plant and the soil gets a little bit more acidic or basic, whatever it is, all these things that change in the environment, you have all these varieties of offspring. So one of them, hopefully, is bound to be more adapted and better fit for that new environment. So that's all there is to say about that. You won't be tested on that. That's just something to keep in the back of your mind when we actually talk about evolution. So any questions about chapter 8? All right. So the next word for attendance will be love. And I'm going to stop recording and then start recording again when because I'm pulling up chapter 9.